Morning school. This year sees the 40th anniversary of the Falklands conflict. This was a 10-week campaign fought in the South Atlantic between British and Argentinian forces over a series of islands, disputed territory in the South Atlantic. Now, if you're part of my generation, you remember this and these events very, very clearly. However, for you, you were not born then. And as we enter the 40th anniversary, I thought it might be useful to give you an introduction and an idea about what the conflict was and how it worked. Now, obviously, when we talk about geopolitical issues like this, it's a very, very complicated situation. But what I hope to do is just give you a brief oversight about what happened and where. So an obvious question may be, where are the Falkland Islands and what are they? Well, as this map shows, they are in the South Atlantic. They are a small group of islands, about 300 miles off the coast of Argentina. They are approximately 7,440 miles away from the UK. Now, the Falkland Islands is made up of nearly 800 islands, many of which are uninhabited, the two main islands being East and West Falkland. Now, given their location, they are a disputed territory. It is a British overseas territory and has been held by the British state since about the 1830s. However, Argentina also have a claim to the island and claim La Malvinas, as they call them, belong to them and should be administered by them. The British claim is based upon continued administration of these islands since about the 1830s and also the right to self-determination. The Falkland Islanders see themselves as British. They speak English and wish to remain part of the British state. Argentina base their claim on historical precedent and geography. So these remote and beautiful islands became a place of conflict and warfare. And you may wonder why. Well, actually, the islands have an important strategic position. They've been a basis for Britain in the South Atlantic for many, many years and have been an important part of the whaling industry as well as coal and oil production. They played an important role in serving British interests in both World War I and World War II. But the post-war years, the 1950s, 60s and 70s, were relatively quiet on the Falkland Islands until the 1980s. In the 1980s, Argentina was ruled by a military junta led by a gentleman called Leopold Galtieri. He was the military ruler of the Argentine state, and possibly in an attempt to detract from economic issues at home and in a bid to raise patriotism, the Argentines decided to invade the Falklands in the early 1980s. They mistakenly believed that given the remoteness of the islands, Britain would not respond militarily to this invasion. And so in April 1982, troops landed first in South Georgia, which is one of the Falkland Islands, and then in Stanley, where the British garrison, the small British garrison, were forced to surrender, and thousands of Argentine troops took command of the Falkland Islands. Despite the enormous logistical challenges of trying to pursue military action on a set of islands 7,500 miles away, the British government responded by quickly putting together a task force. This task force comprised of over 6,000 men and over 30 warships. The difficulties of getting the troops over there were so much that cruise liners like Canberra and the QE2 were requisitioned by the British government to get those troops over to the South Atlantic. And in early April, the troops and the task force were steaming ahead to take on a well-prepared and resolute Argentinian force. This was the first invasion of British territory since the Second World War, and it led to the biggest deployment of British troops since then. What followed was a series of sustained, bloody and brutal battles on air, on land and sea as the various forces battled for control. On the 25th of April 1982, the SAS and SBS, supported by the Royal Marines, liberated and captured South Georgia. And then on the 2nd of May 1982, the submarine HMS Conqueror sank the Argentine cruiser the General Belgrano, killing over 300. The loss of the General Belgrano changed tactics, leaving most of the Argentine Navy in port, and the focus came to the battle in the air. The Argentine planes firing Exocet missiles. On the 4th of May, HMS Sheffield sank after being hit by Argentine fire. And then on the 14th of May, an amphibious landing by British troops on the mainland of the Falkland Islands. Over the next few weeks, fierce fighting by 2 Para and 3 Commando and various other troops at Goose Green and Mount Kent saw British troops slowly take command of the island. The Royal Navy were still being targeted, with the Sir Galahad and Sir Tristan both being hit, killing 56 and many soldiers suffering horrendous injuries. On the 11th of June, the British attacked Mount Tumbledown, and finally on the 14th of June 1982, the Argentine troops surrendered. The Falklands conflict was not without serious cost. 255 British servicemen were killed, with over 775 injured. Nearly 11,500 Argentinian soldiers were captured, 649 were killed, and over 1,600 were severely wounded. Now, of course, those bare figures of personnel who were killed and injured only scratch the surface of the impact of the Falklands War. Each of those men, they were sons, they were fathers, they were brothers, they were husbands. And the consequences of and the effects of that conflict rippled out through British society. And it's perhaps worth remembering as we think back to events of 40 years ago, that the sacrifices were made not just on those islands, but also in the homes of those who were left behind. The Falklands conflict is something that's been widely written about. I recommend to you, if you're interested, if you're a bit of a military historian, I recommend to you Max Hastings and Simon Jenkins' The Battle for the Falklands. That's a tremendous read, and of course I know the history department will be more than happy to talk through any interest and questions you have on it. Okay, have a good day, school.